So we're here with Tristan Morrison, our founding partner and the head of our workers' comp department, to kind of talk about what workers' comp actually is. I feel like a lot of people know that it exists, but don't actually know how it works or what it does or what your rights are. So why don't you first give us a little bit about what it's for?
I'll give you a little bit of a historical perspective, actually. This is interesting. One of the only interesting things about workers' compensation. Workers' compensation came about as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And so as people were moving in from the countryside into factories and urban centers, they were working in dangerous conditions. They would be dealing with machines that could cut off an arm or a leg. They were in polluted environments, and people were getting very, very badly hurt. And so the various legislatures of the states were seeing all these lawsuits where the employee would be suing the employer, saying, you put me into a dangerous situation and I got very hurt, and so that was negligent. And the employer in turn would be talking to the employee in court saying, well, you assumed the risk, you knew that this was a dangerous job, you saw that the work conditions were what they were, so you shouldn't get anything at all. And so you either had a judgment in court where the employee is suing the employer and getting a lot of money, or nothing at all. And so you had these really unfair results where people were getting either astronomical amounts or nothing at all, and that left a lot of people who were honest, hard workers in a situation where their life had been destroyed and there was nothing for them. And so the compromise, the great compromise that the states came up with was the workers' compensation system. And they said, look, we're going to drastically pare down the amount of damages that you can get as an injured worker. But in exchange, we're going to completely take fault out of the equation. So it doesn't matter whose fault it is. If your employer, if it was the employer's fault, then you get workers' compensation benefits. If it was your own fault, you get workers' compensation benefits. So even if you cause your own accident and you badly hurt yourself, there's workers' compensation that's there for you. The difference is that it's going to be a lot less money. We're not going to pay you $1 for pain and suffering. We're not going to pay you $1 for loss of consortium if you can't make love to your husband or wife anymore. There's nothing for that. We're not going to pay you $1 for disfigurement. So if you're horribly scarred and you no longer are able to go out into society without attracting looks, there's not $1 for that under workers' compensation. There is money for three things and three things only in workers' compensation in most cases. And this is where we get into my 3 buckets of money speech that I share with a lot of my clients.
So what are the 3 buckets then?
I'm glad you asked, Bo. The 3 buckets of money are lost wages in bucket 1, medical payments, medical bills in bucket 2, and permanent impairment in bucket 3. Workers' compensation will replace some of your wages. These are bucket 1 wages, wage loss, right? They look at the 13 weeks before your accident, and they say, on average, how much were you earning during those 13 weeks? And that is your average weekly wage. And then they give you 2/3 of that up to a statutory cap, and that cap goes up every few years in Georgia. It's not a whole lot of money. You max out if you're earning around $50,000 a year currently. And so for anybody who is earning more than $50,000 a year, you're going to hit that maximum cap, and that's how much money you're going to get every week. So for example, somebody who's earning $1,000 a week before they get hurt, they're going to get $666 a week of workers' compensation benefits because that's 2/3 of what they were earning before they got hurt. And that only lasts for so many weeks from the date you got hurt, typically either 350 or 400 weeks, or until your doctor says that you're able to go back to work in certain circumstances. So there's a capped wage benefit, and they call that indemnity, and that's bucket 1. Bucket 2 is your medical bills. And the very nice thing about workers' compensation that's different than car accidents, truck accidents, slip and falls, is that there is a bottomless bucket of money for medical care. As long as the authorized doctors say you need it, or if it's legitimate emergency care, you could have $10 million of medical bills and the insurance company is going to pay it. In fact, I've had a client who had terrible burn injuries who gets life flighted over to Doctor's Hospital and then proceeds to be there for 3 months getting skin grafts and all sorts of different care, very specialized care. And the medical bills were in excess of $5 million. And workers' compensation paid all of it. Now, they negotiated with Doctors Hospital to get a better deal, but they had only so much wiggle room on their expenses, and my client didn't have to pay a penny of it. And that is one of the nice things about workers' compensation, is there's a bottomless bucket of money for medical bills.
And so one of the things I did want to kind of bring up, because I heard this story about the guy. He worked at a restaurant and just kind of screwed up and stuck his hand in the fryer. Based off of what you said, that guy, even though, no offense to him, he's an idiot, would still be entitled to his medical treatment and lost wages or indemnity and stuff like that. Is that right?
That's true. There are over 50 defenses to workers' compensation claims, and it does get pretty technical fast. So that person would almost certainly need a lawyer because the insurance company might deny their claim, saying they engaged in willful misconduct, or maybe they weren't really an employee, they were a contractor. Or maybe they had clocked out and they had some sort of issue with whether or not they were within the course and scope of their employment. There's all sorts of defenses that the insurance company can raise. But the fact that the person did something stupid is not a bar to them getting workers' compensation benefits. In fact, I can do better than that. I had a client once who thought that it was a good idea as a landscaping person to take, water bottles and fill them with gasoline. And the reason for this was because they didn't want to have to come all the way back to the truck to refill their various power tools with gasoline. And so they would put them into like Evian bottles, used up water bottles. But in the course of doing that, they would, of course, spill gas on themselves. And not to mention the fact that they basically had a bomb in their pocket. After the job was finished and they're all driving back to the landscaping office and they're in the car driving on the highway, somebody decides it's time for a cigarette. The driver bursts into flames. And the fact that that was not the wisest decision to put that gasoline in his pocket did not prevent me from getting him quite a lot of money.
All right, because that was always one of the things I was curious about is if it actually mattered whose fault it was for that. So it seems like you can be pretty much an idiot and do a lot of real dumb things and still get workers' comp.
Well, and I would always be very hesitant to call any of my clients an idiot.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are put into very difficult situations with their work that makes them have to make decisions on the fly that are difficult. And sometimes they aren't trained to do the things that they're doing. If I've got somebody who is a day laborer who has emigrated from another country with a second grade education and they're asked to do something complicated on an electrical pole, the fact that they got hurt does not mean that they're doing something stupid. It means that they don't have any education and they're in a situation where they were probably going to get hurt at some point or another because the job's difficult. So yes, people do stupid things, and those people are absolutely entitled to workers' compensation as well, but it's not always their fault. And even if it was their fault, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And so also, I want to go back because I don't think we ever touched on it. We talked about indemnity as a bucket of money. We talked about the medical as a bucket of money. What is, I think you said permanent disability or permanent impairment, or what was that?
Correct. Permanent partial impairment. Once you are done getting all the medical care that you need in order to get better, let's say that you are in a factory, an Amazon warehouse, for example, and you are picking up something heavy. And as you're picking that up, pop, you feel that low back disc go. And you go to the doctor and he says, I'm sorry, man, you're in a situation where that disc isn't going to get better with physical therapy or injections. You're going to need to have surgery. Well, even after surgery, you're never going to be in a situation where your back's good enough to go back to picking up 200-pound buckets of whatever they've got you picking up at Amazon. And so you have some amount of permanent impairment. The doctor is going to review your case and do some testing. They're going to use a big green book called the AMA's 5th edition guide to the evaluation of permanent impairment. And they're going to figure out how much permanent impairment you have based on what surgery you got, based on how much range of motion you have, how much pain you have when you're doing that motion, and kind of what your limitations are. And then they assign you an impairment rating either to your whole body or to a particular body part, like your arm or your leg. And then there's a rule in the little booklet of workers' compensation statutes and board rules that says exactly what you get for each amount of impairment. There's a list. It says if your whole body is impaired, you get 300 weeks of benefits multiplied by whatever your impairment rating is, multiplied by your compensation rate, which is the amount we talked about earlier, that average weekly wage times 2/3. So there's a lot of math involved in workers' compensation. And when it comes time for me to sit down with my client and evaluate how much we should be asking for in settlement, that's part of what my client is buying when they hire me, is the understanding of all the math that goes into the case. Because there are a lot of benefits calculations that workers' compensation attorneys learn to do.
And so we've got the three buckets. You also brought up something. I think you said there are over like 50 or 60 defenses that the insurance companies and employers could raise. Like, what was that about?
So claims can be denied for various different reasons, and there's a lot of different defenses that you learn as a defense attorney that are legitimate basis to deny a claim for workers' compensation such that the injured worker doesn't get anything at all. And part of what you learn as a defense attorney is all those different tricks to exclude a claim. In fact, that for a lot of us, I know you were a defense attorney for a while, learning to do personal injury and representing big employers and insurance companies. I did the same thing. For almost a decade, I was out there working for insurance companies and for big employers, learning about all the defenses to these things, and eventually teaching them and teaching, entire stadiums full of insurance adjusters what it means to defend a claim. And so with workers' compensation, from the very beginning, much more so than with personal injury, you are in a battle with the insurance adjuster and potentially also a defense attorney to demonstrate that your claim is legitimate and that you don't fall within any of those excludable categories. And so I have a friend who practices the same area of law as me, and he had a phrase saying, well begun is half done. And I think that's very true in workers' compensation, because the way that you start your claim sets the tone for the entire remainder of the claim. If your claim is denied at the beginning versus accepted, it's going to be an uphill battle for the next year before you can get into court to demonstrate that you're entitled to these benefits and settle the case for fair value or get the benefits commenced. So I always caution people that if you have a real injury at work, not a stub toe, not a little cut, but something that's going to change your life that you might need surgery for, it's a good idea to call a lawyer right away, because that lawyer is going to educate you on how the insurance company is going to go about trying to destroy your case, trying to find a defense, trying to take a recorded statement, and just preparing you.
And so I guess one of the things I'd be curious about, what do you do in that interim where if you don't know that you did surgery or not?
Well, first of all, you definitely call a lawyer and talk to them. And you may not hire them, but you just get advice. And you say, look, I'm in a situation where I'm still really hurting, and I'm afraid that I'm going to need more significant care, but I'm going to this terrible clinic where they don't care about me, and they don't care about whether or not I'm going to get better, and they won't give me any testing. And that lawyer can give you some tips on how to communicate with the occupational clinic or how to get away from the occupational clinic so that you can get whatever testing and care you need and figure out whether or not this is going to be a life-changing injury or something that you get better from after a couple weeks.
So it sounds like if there's any question about how hurt you are, you should at least call a workers' comp attorney to discuss your
it's
case.
free to call.
Yeah.
And there have definitely been times when I've talked to somebody several times before we ever agreed to work with each other. Just talk to somebody and say, look, if I was in your situation, here's what I would do. I think you probably need to talk to this person, and I think you need to report this to your supervisor, and here's how I'd do it. But unless you end up needing this kind of care, then, it's not a situation where you really need a lawyer. But it's a good idea to talk to an attorney, because usually, at least with our firm, the consultation's free. There's never going to be any hard sell on your case. Frankly, it's usually a situation where somebody, if they're hurt badly enough, they're really in desperate need of a lawyer, and there's no question that we're going to work together. It's the situations where somebody's urging me to be their lawyer, where I don't feel like they need a lawyer, where I'm having to talk people off of that idea, where I think it's going to do more harm than good.
Yeah, because I think you said that if you do hire the lawyer and you do get involved, then typically as soon as the insurance company knows you're involved, you're now in a fight.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and there's definitely times when I've had clients end up not being as hurt as they thought they were. And in those circumstances, sometimes the cases don't settle, and in that case, they don't owe me anything. end up in a situation where they go back to work and they're happy with their employer, and we just part ways. You know, say, okay, you're good, you're better. You've gotten the benefits that you were entitled to. There's nothing else for me to do. You know, I try to avoid getting too involved in cases where people are not going to need a lawyer, but at the same time, if that happens, I'm usually happy for people because I'd rather them get better and not need my help than be in a situation where even I'm getting them millions of dollars, because I've had that, you know, where we get people literally millions of dollars, and they would still, of course, rather be not catastrophically injured.
Yeah.
You know, because that's life-changing. If you or a loved one has been in a catastrophic work injury, call us today at Morrison Hughes.